Hello, welcome to HoloEdit. In this video, we're going to walk through the HoloEdit interface. We won't be going into the how in this video, but instead, we'll be taking a quick tour of the interface so as to familiarize yourself with HoloEdit before diving into processing data. Highlighted here is a project window. This is where you'll be importing and managing your project assets and saved compositions in your workspace. If you have mesh, texture, and audio data in a folder located in your HoloEdit workspace, it'll be indexed automatically. If the mesh and texture are not kept in the workspace folder, you can drag and drop your data into the folder path in the project window and HoloEdit will begin indexing your files. Once folders containing imported data types are indexed in your workspace, a button titled Make Clip will appear beside the folder. Use this button to import your data into HoloEdit for editing. You can use the right mouse button to update, rename, and delete clips in your workspace. Once a clip has been created, you'll drag it over to the composition window. This is where you'll begin processing your data by adding stages. Stages are layered on top of your load assets, with each one adding its own effect. To add a stage, you click on the plus button, and this will bring up a list of stages you can begin to add to your stream. Alright, now let's take a look at the buttons within the composition windows. In the top left corner, we have an Add Track button. Clicking this will allow you to drag over an additional set of mesh and texture streams. To the right, we have the Delete button for removing tracks or stages. Keep in mind that this cannot be undone as there is no undo action within HoloEdit. Further to the right is a time code for the composition. At its default, it's set to seconds, and you can change the units to frames by clicking the F to the right of the units here. To change it back, just click the S. To the left of each stage name is this lock icon, which will lock the stage and prevent any accidental parameter changes or movements within the timeline. There's also an eye icon to enable or disable visibility. It's important to be aware that tracks with the visibility toggled off will not export while using the export composition feature. Finally, the three dots to the right of the stage name brings up a list of options that allow you to rename, copy, paste, clear intervals, or delete data. The propagate intervals to next stage option will copy all intervals from the current stage to the next stage, which we'll cover more thoroughly in another video. When in the timeline, you can scrub through your volumetric clip by clicking and dragging the playhead forwards or backwards, and you can use the mouse scroll wheel to zoom in or out of the timeline. The timeline zoom is the pink bar with handles at the very top of the timeline. It can also be used to move forward or backwards in the timeline, and clicking and dragging on the pink handles will zoom in or out. The bar directly over the track indicates the loop selection. This can be resized by clicking and dragging the pink handles to either side, and moved by clicking and dragging on the body of the selection. Playback will stop and start within these boundaries. The buttons in the middle of the timeline mimic standard editing software. The two larger arrows will play the clip forwards and backwards at normal speed. The next set of arrows, titled Step Forward or Step Backward, will move in either direction by one frame. These next arrows can jump to the beginning of our looped range, and finally, these arrows will jump to the beginning or end of our composition. By clicking the button in the bottom right corner of the timeline, we can continuously loop our selection, and it can be reset by clicking the Reset Loop Markers button. We also have options for snapping. When playhead snap is turned on, we can set our playhead to a certain point on our timeline, and when we're resizing or dragging an interval, it will snap to the playhead. We can snap intervals to other intervals when interval snap is turned on. And we also have frame snap, which cannot be disabled as frames are the smallest unit that can be adjusted at this time. Within the timeline, actions can be taken by clicking the right mouse button. You can right-click on a range of highlighted frames, an interval, or an empty space in a track, and this will bring up different context menus for helpful timeline functions. To the left of the timeline, you'll find two tools, the Timeline Selection tool and the Razor tool. You'll use the Timeline Selection tool to select tracks, intervals, and in and out handles, while the Razor tool is used to split parts of the clip just like you would in today's current video editing software. Left-click the Razor tool to cut the stage under your cursor, or use Shift left-click to cut the whole track at a specified frame. Finally, these last two buttons in the bottom left corner of the timeline are Scroll to Top, which will bring you to the topmost track, and Frame Composition, which will frame the entire track to fit within the size of the timeline. Alright, so let's talk about the viewport. This is the viewport window. This is where your 3D data will be displayed and will reflect where you're scrubbing through in the timeline. You can use the camera within the viewport to move around your mesh in 3D space and view your work from any angle. To move the camera, hold the Alt button and then click and drag to rotate around the center of the viewport. Holding the middle mouse button down and dragging will pan the camera. Scrolling on the mouse wheel or pressing Alt while holding the right mouse button and dragging the mouse back and forth or up and down will zoom or dolly the camera in and out. And lastly, we can reset our camera view to focus back on our subject by pressing F. You can select, translate, or rotate your clip using the transform tools found at the top left of the viewport window. HoloEdit comes with a variety of view modes to display different aspects of your capture. Looking at the different attributes can help you determine how to process your data and is located in the drop-down menu at the top right of the viewport. Let's take a look at what each one of these view modes does. Shaded displays the current composition's geometry without textures and with lighting. Keep in mind, lighting in HoloEdit will only work if there's normals present in the mesh stream. Wireframe displays the current composition's geometry in wireframe mode. Textured Unlit displays the current composition's geometry with textures and without lighting. Textured Shaded displays the current composition's geometry with textures and with lighting. Keep in mind, for these to work, a texture stream's corresponding texture data must be present. Use the UVs mode to display the UVs of your current composition's geometry. The UV mode displays the UVs using a red-green gradient map and will allow you to review your UV layout when present. A mesh without UVs will show up as completely green. Normals will display the normals of your current composition's geometry. The Normals View mode displays the world space normals per vertex and will allow you to review the mesh's normals when present. A mesh without normals will show up as completely red. There's also an option called Display Toggles, which can overlay visual information over the already mentioned display options. These toggles are Wireframe Overlay, which displays wireframe edges in combination with shaded or textured view modes. Render Reverse Faces toggles between back face and front face coloring. And Vertex Colors will display the geometry with vertex colors when included with the mesh. HoloEdit also includes different camera options which can be found as a drop-down menu next to the view modes. These options are Perspective, which is the default, and Orthographic. The Perspective view allows for standard viewport navigation. Orthographic has several view modes along the X, Y, and Z axis and cannot be rotated. Under the cogwheel, we have a Debug toggle. This toggle will display the current rendering sources in light gray text at the bottom of your viewport. This will identify which stages and streams are currently contributing to the flattened composition being drawn in the viewport. Render Stats will show the FPS rate of the viewport and how many verts and tries are present on the active frame. Now let's take a look at the inspector. Using HoloEdit's default layout, the inspector is located to the right of the viewport. What you see in the inspector will vary based on the selection you've made in HoloEdit. With the stage or interval selected, you can tweak the parameters at different stages like Clean Mesh, Stabilize Mesh, or Generate Skeleton that you use to compress and transform your volumetric data. With the clip selected from the project window, you can preview the source data information and the contents of the clip. When a track is selected, you can scale, rotate, and position your data. It's important to note that while the data updates its appearance in the viewport, whatever scale and transform adjustments you make to the clip are not finalized until you export the clip using Export Composition. Clicking on this button in the bottom right-hand corner will bring up the Task Manager. This displays the status of importing, uploading, and exporting your data in HoloEdit. You can cancel tasks using the X icon beside the task's name, and clear resolve tasks using the Clear Resolve Task icon at the top left corner of the Task Manager. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the File menu. Here, there are options to save, close, start a new composition, or load a previous one. You can also open or close workspaces, and when you're eventually ready to export your data, you'll come here to find the export options. You can adjust the placement of different windows by clicking on the window's name and dragging it to different highlighted areas of the HoloEdit interface. If you ever need to reset back to default, you can click the window drop-down menu, navigate to load layout, and select default layout. Alright, so that concludes your tour of the HoloEdit interface. You should now be familiar with the purpose of different windows, timeline navigation, camera navigation, and the tools available within HoloEdit. In the next video, we'll dive into the basics of processing data.